Good morning and welcome to Breakfast with Boyden. I'm Wendy Wilsker, Managing Partner at Boyden Boston. And today I am so excited to have our special guest, Elizabeth Abel. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Really excited to be here.
So Elizabeth and I first met last fall. I distinctly remember I was in my car listening to an episode of the Development Debrief podcast, and Elizabeth was talking about what is next in fundraising in this post-COVID world. And I think I stayed in my car longer because I just loved everything that I was hearing and it resonated, and reached out to Elizabeth. And we've had several conversations since that time. And our most recent conversation was about strategic planning for people, not for organizations. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. Before we jump into all of that, for those of you who do not have the pleasure of knowing Elizabeth yet, Elizabeth Abel is a Senior Vice President at CCS. She has been with CCS since 2013, where she has partnered with institutions to plan and implement large-scale fundraising campaigns with revenue goals ranging from $5 million to over $1 billion. In her role, she provides counsel on strategic planning, major gifts fundraising, and board engagement. She has directed campaign planning studies, served in interim development roles, and managed annual campaigns and special fundraising events. Elizabeth has shared that her mission is to educate and empower nonprofit leaders with the knowledge and tools to elevate philanthropy and drive social change. I love that. So, Elizabeth, you've been with CCS for 9 years, which is a very long time in nonprofits. Tell us what keeps you at CCS.
I would be happy to. And, it's funny, my 9-year anniversary, and I am someone that very much keeps track of those anniversaries, was just a few weeks ago. So this idea of why I've stayed at the same company for nearly a decade has been top of mind for me in this moment right now. And there are 3 reasons. So the first reason has to do with the work and what I do every day, which is to work with amazing nonprofits across the country in different sectors who are all at inflection points, who are preparing to scale, to grow, and to better serve their communities. And so it's a privilege to be a part of those projects and be at the table with their leadership each and every day. The second reason I have stayed at the same organization is because of the people. It is not lost on me how lucky I am to work with people who are committed to advancing mission-driven organizations, who come from diverse backgrounds, who have different experiences prior to coming to CCS, and who bring energy and commitment and passion to, quite candidly, changing the world and making it a better place for all. And then the third reason I've stayed at CCS for as long as I have, and I know this will be a big portion of our conversation, is because of the professional development and growth experiences that I've had in these 9 years. So in our company, we have a really robust mentorship program, an onboarding program, corporate learning, conferences. And in the 9 years that I've been here, I've been a mentor, I've been mentored, I've co-chaired conferences, I've attended them. And so this idea of professional growth as a continuous learning opportunity to not only be my best professional self, but really serve the nonprofits that I'm privileged to work with has been one of the key driving factors in my tenure.
That's great. And that's just a great jumping off point, and certainly informs a lot of what you've been thinking about. Last September, you wrote an article for the Nonprofit Pro called "What's Your People's Strategic Plan? Why Nonprofit Leaders Should Invest in Talent and Culture." In your article, you assert that nonprofit leaders need a clear and consistent framework and set a measurable set of actions to invest in their people and culture. Just like organizations have a strategic plan to achieve financial and programmatic goals, they should have a roadmap to invest in talent development too. It sounds so obvious, but it's not. It's not. So tell us more about this whole idea of a people's strategic plan.
I would be happy to. So in my role, we focus quite often with funding large-scale strategic plans through philanthropy. And more often than not, these strategic plans focus on programming, on financial revenue goals, and on impact. And I started to see consistently that there was this missing opportunity and missing part of these strategic plans, which was focused on talent and people. Because without the people to implement the programs or develop the strategy or, find the funds, then we're not going to reach our goals. And so I started to think a little bit more critically about what does it mean to have a strategic plan, and more specifically, to have a people strategic plan. And this was compounded by 2020 and the beginning of the Great Resignation. And companies and leadership were talking almost daily about recruitment and retention and onboarding and professional development. Yet the conversations felt as if these were separate, disparate challenges. Whereas I believe, from my vantage point, they're interrelated. And organizations should have a strategic people's plan so that they are recruiting and onboarding and developing and celebrating and retaining their people more holistically. And so this article outlines a five-phased roadmap to do just that, to really think about how we are creating an inclusive and dynamic culture where people can thrive and be their best professional selves. And ultimately, that in turn will allow these nonprofits, and quite candidly, any company, to maximize their own revenue, whether it's philanthropic revenue or earned revenue, and then have the greatest benefit to the communities that they're serving.
It's so interesting because when we meet with search committees, one of the first things they will ask is, how do you know this person's going to stay? And I always flip that question and say, well, what are you going to do to ensure that this person stays? So what are some key things that you think employers need to be thinking about? Here we are. The Great Resignation means we're in kind of the great hiring. So in this great hiring, what should come next is the great retention. But a lot of work has to happen and a lot of intentionality. So what are some key things that employers need to think about?
So many things. So I will pick three. So the first is culture. So the number one thing that I believe leaders and managers and hiring managers should be emphasizing is culture. And that is an inclusive culture where every single person feels valued for their unique identity and contributions and voice. And so there are different ways in which an organization or company can do that. Some of them are ERGs, employee resource groups. So we have a number of them here at our firm. We have a working parents ERG. We have a multicultural ERG. And what I've seen in the past 2-3 years since these ERGs have been founded is the strong sense of community and collaboration and teamwork that they embody. And there's a multiplier effect. People want to show up to work. They feel valued. They're then inspired to work harder and better and with more heart for our clients and the organizations that we partner with. So that's the first thing, is really building and then emphasizing an inclusive and energizing culture. The second thing is growth. So what are the opportunities that we can intentionally provide our employees with so that they stay? And what I found for me is that the growth opportunities are different at different stages in your career. So when I first started at CCS, I was assigned a mentor, which might sound perhaps silly or slightly patronizing given that I was a mid-career professional. But my mentor for me was a key person that I admired, aspired to be, valued as a strategic advisor and thought partner, and who really helped me grow in my first 1 to 2 years at the firm. And so being intentional about assigning a new employee a mentor that he or she can learn from, funding opportunities for professional development, whether it's sending your people to conferences or hiring an executive coach for one-on-one work for perhaps your emerging executive cohorts. But what are the opportunities that we can do to intentionally enrich the kind of intellectual caliber of our people? And then the third thing is value. How do we make people feel valued for their contributions and their accomplishments? And this is something that I'm personally really excited by, because I think there's so much opportunity to recognize excellence and celebrate wins. And especially in the nonprofit community where we're so focused on meeting our fundraising goals, getting prepared for the next meeting, we don't often take the time to celebrate what's done well, what gifts we have secured, what gala goals we've raised. And so something that I try really hard to do with the directors that I work with and with the clients that I work with is to always take a moment at the top of every meeting to celebrate wins. We do something at our company called Good News. And so it's a firm-wide newsletter that goes out every Friday. It is my favorite email. I have looked forward to it every year for the past 9 years. And it's basically an opportunity for people to submit their good news. So my client raised $100,000 this year, or we were preparing for $1 million ask and we solicited it and it closed. And so it's an opportunity to celebrate everyone's accomplishments across the firm. And I think it builds so much energy and appreciation. And, when I was newer to the firm and I had good news, I loved submitting it. And now I love seeing the people who I manage, I love seeing their good news in this report as well.
I love that. When I was with Jewish Family and Children's Service of Greater Boston, my colleague who ran the Community Services Division would send out an email on Fridays, and it would be highlighting the work of the week, and it would often include a client note, and it would say like these little wins, and it always recognized people. There was very little turnover in that division in the 7 years that I was there. And for me and my role as chief advancement officer and my, team, my fundraisers, it was great to have these stories, but it also grounded us, right, in the why of the work that we were doing. And we started sharing it, actually. We started sharing it with our board members so that they would learn as well. But it was kind of getting back to whatever happened during the week. That was what the purpose was, and providing such recognition. And it was, I think, this one of the single most important retention strategies that they had. You've talked a lot about what work the employers do. And sometimes I think that it all has to come from the organization out to the individual. Last summer, I gave a workshop to a group of fundraisers, and we called it Moves Management for Your Career. And we talked about the things that fundraisers do so naturally in identifying and cultivating and stewarding their donors. And we talked about reviewing prospect pools. And I asked people to turn it on themselves and to say, well, when was the last time that you reconnected with a colleague? Or when was the last time that you reviewed your resume? And so I think there are some things that people can be doing, applying their skills in nonprofit work, in fundraising, to be managing their career. So, I'm wondering what advice you have, kind of thinking about if someone is not in that amazing culture like what you have, what can people be doing on their own to be taking the initiative, to be thinking about their careers and managing their careers?
First of all, I wish I was in that workshop. I feel like I would have been front row. This is like right up my alley. So I think what I've seen both firsthand and with many of my colleagues is this idea that you are your own greatest self-advocate. There is only so much our companies or our organizations can do, but we have to kind of meet them and be our own champions as well. And so I would say the greatest lesson that I have learned over the past few years is just the power of networking and asking questions. And if the remote pandemic world has taught us anything, it's that people are so accessible and willing and eager to connect, to share their stories, to open doors. And so oftentimes it is on us as individuals to open the door we want to see for ourselves and to find one or two champions who can support and advocate for you. So one of the things that I talk about in this article that I wrote is this idea of having quarterly check-ins with your manager. And so for the past probably 5 years or so, I've scheduled quarterly check-ins with my boss because I felt like our 1-year focal review conversations did not provide enough of an ongoing conversation. And it felt like we were trying to squeeze so much into 45 minutes. And so I kind of put myself on my boss's calendar every quarter, and I would come prepared with questions ranging from, let's talk about the state of the company. What's keeping you up at night? How do I fit into the future of the company? What are some things that I should be doing that I'm not doing? And then every quarter, I would kind of come prepared with updates on what I've done since we last spoke and what I should do next. And what I felt like that did for me is it created that momentum. Just like we take our donors out to coffee to cultivate them and get to know them, we always have, here's the next opportunity for you to be engaged in our back pocket. And so I kind of, without realizing it, took your methodology and started to apply that to myself. Mm-hmm. And the best advice that I do give to colleagues who are recently joining the firm or others who are beginning their career in the nonprofit space is to be intentional about your own professional development, to ask questions, to dedicate time, once a quarter to run through your own network and who should you be taking out to coffee or who should you be reaching out to on LinkedIn to ask about career advice. Because what I've learned is people love talking about themselves and have really, really valuable stories to share.
Absolutely. It gets me to think about where time is precious, and we work with both large organizations and small organizations, and the goals keep on getting more and more ambitious, and the pressure and the stress gets higher and higher. And I think that, sometimes there are fewer resources. So what do you say to a manager who says, this sounds great. I don't have that kind of human resources department. I don't have the time. I don't have the resources. How do you recommend, right, where there's such nimbleness and sometimes lack of resources? Because I think what you're sharing, this idea of a people strategic plan, can be broken down into some smaller parts. So how do you take it from feeling like, it's not all or nothing? How do you break it down a little bit?
So at a high level, I would say we can't afford to not dedicate time to our people. And one of my favorite phrases of late has been, you can't boil the ocean. We're not going to create a people strategic plan overnight. It's going to take time. And as any strategic plan is developed, it's small micro steps. So what are the steps that we can do as managers and as nonprofit leaders each day that collectively build that culture that I was talking about in the beginning of our conversation? I just finished a phenomenal book called Smart Growth by Whitney Johnson, who's the CEO of Disruption Advisors and a leading firm on kind of growth management and business. And this idea is that in order to grow your company, you must grow your people, because your people are your levers for growth. And so we need to be intentional about how we are creating a culture that will provide for what she calls smart growth. And it really reinforced this idea of leaders as multipliers, that we are kind of perhaps providing the strategic direction and guidance and support, but that we need our teams and we need our people to collectively reach our goals. So maybe that small step is, scheduling 15 minutes with one of your direct reports every Tuesday morning to just check in. Or maybe it's a handwritten card on their annual company anniversary. And maybe once they get to 3 years or 5 years, it's something tangible that really marks their dedication. But what is it that we can do? Just like we would steward our donors, how are we stewarding our employees? And so I think more now than it ever has been before, how we cultivate and onboard and grow and recognize and celebrate the extraordinary people that are a part of our teams and who are contributing daily to our success is and should be top of mind for every leader that's thinking about future growth.
Absolutely. I've often thought, and I spoke on a couple of other podcasts, what if we treated our employees the way we treat our major donors? Right? When you think about in nonprofits, just talking about, your frontline fundraisers, they're responsible for bringing in millions of dollars. They actually are major donors. And so how would we look at things a little bit differently, right? If we were thinking about, you'd never forget a major donor's birthday or a milestone or a life cycle, and sending them a note and making sure that you have lunch with them or coffee with them. And so I do think there's so many wonderful and important things that we do in the nonprofit sector of caring and being authentic and passionate about our mission. And I think to your point, it's all about people, right? So how do we look at the mission of saving the world? And the mission has to be about the people who are going to be doing that. So I cannot wait to get that book, Smart Growth. It's going to be on my Amazon list. Elizabeth, we have a tradition at Breakfast with Boyden to end our conversations by asking guests to share a meaningful and memorable cup of coffee or tea in your case. I know that you love your tea. So share with us a memorable afternoon tea that you've had.
Yes, I am an avid tea drinker. I don't need any extra caffeine in my day. So my recent most memorable cup of tea was with a woman who's actually become my mentor and role model, Lydia Finette. She is a leader at Christie's and the author of The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. And our conversation came at a time I recently returned to work as a new working mother and really wanted to figure out, what's my own growth path and what was going to bring me energy in a new role that I was feeling both as a mom and as an executive and as a woman in philanthropy. And Lydia shared this story about when she first started in her career, this concept, and she coins it in her book called the strike method. And so Lydia is a lead auctioneer for nonprofit galas here in New York and around the world. And she talked about how when she first started, she had this little gavel that she would bang down on the table before she started any auction. And it turned out that this was her confidence hack, her one good thing, if you will, this tool that brings her energy. And so this idea of what brings you energy has been something that has been top of mind for me as I get up each morning. Really, what is it that brings me energy? And so when I think about a memorable cup of coffee or tea, it was with her because she really helped me crystallize what it is for me that brings me energy to do the work that I do, to work with nonprofit leaders, to help them drive meaningful social change, and to, quite frankly, make people's lives better and make the world more just and inclusive. And it's really been the work that I've been doing and the ability to leverage philanthropy to realize this world that we want to be a part of. And so another book, I'm a little bit of a book nerd, but this idea of what brings you energy. And so I would encourage all of you who are, listening to our conversation or tuning in today to ask yourself what brings you energy and to really lean into that, because at the end of the day, life is short and we want to live as joyful a life as we can. And so it's important that as we think about the jobs that we're working in and the careers that we're building and the teams that we're a part of, that all of that work is bringing us energy to, bring our best selves each day.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time with us. We could talk for hours and hours, but I'm not quite sure that our viewers would stick around. So I look forward, Elizabeth, to our continued many conversations. Thank you so much for being part of Breakfast with Boyden.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.